Yeah.
Relax.
Okay, we'll go home. You sit over there. the Steele Center. And today we have Dr. Rebecca Resinski, who's a professor in the classics department. I'm very excited that Dr. Resinski is going to be talking about the ancient and modern metamorphoses of Daphne. So let's give her a warm welcome.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to thank Dr. Dow and Tammy Vanman and her team for inviting me to give the talk and setting up all these practicalities. I just want to mention at the outset that I am going to be talking about gender violence or attempted gender violence and sexual menace. And we'll see some related images. And I just want people to know so they can make their own decision about staying or not. So I'm going to talk with you today about Greek and Roman myth and the particular myth of Daphne and Apollo. I spent a lot of my time thinking about myth, both in my teaching and in my research. And my particular interest is in how myths, these traditional stories, get reshaped by authors in order to examine and critique their societies. We can think of myths as narratives that can be used to process society, right? It's a way of meditating through story on how the society is set up and how it is working. And I think that this myth of Daphne and Apollo processes and critiques gendered expectations and gender-based hierarchy. So here is another sort of thing I want to really underscore up front. Male privilege is going to be examined in everything that follows. And I really want to emphasize that I am not critiquing individual men, right? I'm not piling on men today. I think that myth is really useful because it pushes us to think about patterns and structures and dynamics. It highlights those rather than individual people, right? So we're looking at sort of how these individual characters manifest social tendencies, right? Or social expectations. We're not sort of just piling on individual men. We're exploring systems, not individual people. So I'm going to start by going through the story of Daphne and Apollo so that we have a basis. Then we'll move into looking at some transformations of this tale, and you all will be chiming in. But at the upfront, I'm just going to set it out so we're all kind of on the same page. So just some names that I'll be using. So I'm going to follow the version of the story that is told by the Roman poet Ovid in his poem Metamorphoses. And it is the most complete version of this story that we have from antiquity. So Daphne is a nymph, and she's the daughter of a river god named Peneus. She's a follower of Diana, that's Greek Artemis, Roman Diana, Greek Artemis. And Diana is a hunter goddess. She's a virgin goddess, right? She does not get married, and she has a pack of women who go around with her, and they are all sort of virgin hunters. Daphne has rejected suitors. She does not want to get married. And her father keeps pressing her. Ovid mentions this, that she keeps getting pressed to get married. Her father says, "You owe me a son-in-law. You owe me grandchildren," as if it's a debt that she has to pay. Apollo, god of music, poetry, and medicine, has just killed a monstrous snake. And he's very proud of himself. He shot it with his bow and arrow, and he boasts that he is the best archer. Cupid, the god of love, actually says, "Nah, I'm the better archer." And he sets out to prove that he is actually the better archer than Apollo. So we have this male-male competition. So what he does is he shoots Apollo with one arrow that makes him desire Daphne. And Cupid shoots Daphne with another kind of arrow that makes her really not want Apollo. She already didn't want to get married, right? But now she has this arrow shot in her that makes her really not want to be with Apollo. In his desire, Apollo chases after Daphne and she runs from him. Then Ovid does this interesting thing. He he sort of gives us Apollo's perspective on the chase and Daphne's perspective on the chase. Apollo's perspective on the chase is this: wow, she looks great, right? So she's trying to run away from him, and he just thinks, wow, her hair is streaming back, and her clothes are showing her limbs off. So he's sort of caught up with the aesthetic spectacle of this woman trying to escape him, right? He's so caught up in his desire that he just is like, this is gorgeous. Then it quickly shifts to Daphne's point of view. Her point of view is, this is a predator-prey relationship going on here. He is like a hunting dog and I'm being hunted, right? So we get those two perspectives of this experience juxtaposed. When Daphne reaches the river of her father Peneus, she begs him to release her from the beauty that has caused her such trouble, right? She's like, I just want to escape my situation. And she gets turned into a tree, a laurel tree. That's the kind of tree that we get bay leaves from, right? So she's turned into a laurel tree. Even as a tree, though, she's beautiful. And Apollo embraces her. She can't run now because she's a tree. Apollo also claims her for his own. He says, you will be my symbol, right? And the laurel wreath, right? Wreath of these leaves becomes a symbol of poetic, military, and political power in antiquity. So even though Apollo doesn't get her sexually, he does appropriate her, right? And uses her as a symbol of his own identity, almost. The tree then shakes its leaves, right? So Daphne is a tree in Apollo's story. In Ovid's story. Sorry, I got my names messed up. So in Ovid's story, Daphne is a tree. She shakes her leaves, and Apollo sees that and interprets it as consent. Like, oh yeah, I agree to be appropriated. But Ovid leaves it open. Of course, that could be consent, but it could also be no way, right? It could also be dissent, or it could be just leaves in the wind, right? So notice Apollo is interpreting it in a way that sort of feeds what he wants to happen. But Ovid signals it enough that we could be like, yeah, I don't know if you can interpret it that way, right? You might have a different interpretation. So Ovid leaves it open to us to kind of close the loop on the story and what we think about Daphne's agreement or not at the end. So just to hear from you all a little bit, based on that summary, what pops out to you all as aspects of gender dynamics that are being highlighted, moments that you found interesting here?
The preparation of war. Wreath was like a symbol of military and like a poetic power. It's definitely like this interesting notion of like the world tree becomes like a feminine image and then repurposed as like a masculine image. It's that kind of appropriation.
Yes, she becomes symbolic, right? The female becomes symbolically deployed, right? She can't be had sexually, but she can be had symbolically, and she's still being put to a male-centered use. Yes, absolutely. And Ovid underscores that in his poem. He says, he draws the connection. He reminds his readers, he says, and remember, this laurel symbol is still being used by us today, right? So that it's sort of like on their minds, like, oh yeah, we use this symbol, right, of male power that's based on female symbolic appropriation. Yeah, Mel.
I just kind of get the vibe that she's basically just being punished for the entire time. If she was a man and she'd been let up on kids, hang out, worship and just do my thing, oh yeah, that's fine, just do your thing. But she's being punished the entire time for the way that she wants to exist. And the way that she wants to exist is stripped away from her, and now she's existing in this crap place and she's just punished.
Yes, on the one hand, she was free to run when she was in anthropomorphic form, but she really wasn't free, right? Because she was sort of hemmed in by these expectations that she would participate in heterosexuality, that she would have children, right? The father's like, you owe me this, right? So she was hemmed in, and then she literally gets hemmed in by the bark, right? And not being able to move.
It's interesting to me that even as a tree, she's described as beautiful. Like she's literally just, she's a part of nature. She's just a tree, but still is objectified. She's not a person to be sexualized, but there's still like, I have a claim on this beautiful tree.
Yes, that something about the way she looks, right, abides, and other people get to claim that somehow, right? And as if it's there to serve them, right? As if the beauty is there to serve others.
In my like studies of creative writing major, analyze it and like see it from a bunch of different sides and like write about it, even like rewrite it myself last year in a poetry class. And I've always seen it as her being victimized and never like she never has any power in the situation at all. Like I've never seen it from a perspective of like villainizing Apollo in like modern renditions.
And we're gonna look at some modern renditions. And I found ones that I think do criticize Apollo, because there's this tendency to just be like, oh, how picturesque this is. A woman becomes a tree, right? But it is really disturbing, right? How limited her options are. And Ovid, I think, goes out of his way to highlight her limited options, because she does not have the freedom to call her shots about who she wants to be. And I think we're going to look at some pieces where authors are kind of pushing back on that and trying to either highlight it or give Daphne some power. But it's like Ovid really underscores the hierarchy here, because he does not want it to escape notice, right? He makes her so disempowered in a way so that we can really see this gendered imbalance.
I think it's kind of interesting that in the Cupid Apollo dispute to who's the better archer, and Cupid wanting to prove that he is the better archer, kind of uses a woman who is, she's not really involved in any of the beast slaying or any of the situation. She is the daughter of a river god, but she's not like a main figure of mythology like these other gods. So it's interesting that she kind of gets tossed in as a plaything for Cupid's entertainment, because him making her not like him and him desire her in such a way kind of is humorous in looking at it from a child point of view, where you don't see implications. You're just like, haha, it's funny, someone wants something and they can't have it. But it's kind of upsetting and demeaning when looking up close to see how easily women can get thrown into these situations.
The way that Ovid sets it up, he could have told this story without that Cupid Apollo contest. That is not necessary in all the renditions. By having it set up that way, he has her be a tool at the outset, and then she's a tool at the end, right? The way that she's a tool, as she's a symbol at the end when she's a laurel tree. She's actually being used at the beginning too. And then she's used in the middle for Apollo's aesthetic pleasure, and also her father wants to use her to get a son-in-law and children. So it's at every moment of the story, she is a tool, right? Where she's being used, and she's being used for male purposes. And so maybe just one more and then we'll move on. This is great.
I was going to say that it's interesting that when she was running away, she was going to her own father, right, and begging him, and he still turned her into something, and he was like, I want you to get married and stuff, and he made her beautiful. I don't know if that was
I think it's great that you flagged the father here. And there's going to be one poem that we look at that sort of wants to push on the father thing. What is the role of Pennius here, right? Because he wants certain things from her. He also seems to want to help her get out of this tricky situation. So he's going to have to give up a little bit of what he wants, but he also then has to turn his daughter into a being with no agency at all, right? So I do think the father's role is really ambivalent here. And that's good to underscore that right now. So I do think we see homosocial tension, the tension between men being played out using a female character. We see gender-based hierarchy. We see the demands of compulsory heterosexuality, and we see a female lose agency and be appropriated. So all of it is making sure you see it. And this is one of the first stories he tells in this poem. So he is really getting these issues on the radar through this story. I think of it as giving Roman readers an X-ray of gender dynamics in his society and gendered expectations in his society through this story. It's like an X-ray. So this story becomes massively famous in the Middle Ages, Renaissance, and after. There are so many renditions of it in artworks. And the most famous rendition is this statue by Bernini, which is now housed in Rome. And viewers for centuries have been captivated by it when they go visit it, because Bernini is a master at marbling, right? The delicacy that he can convey in the marble is honestly astounding. But I want us to just pause for a minute and think about the subject matter. Because is Bernini, like Apollo, finding aesthetic pleasure in the distress of a female fleeing from a potential rapist, right? Is he encouraging us as viewers to do the same, to sort of be in a remove from this situation, right? And just be like, oh, how beautifully done, right? But like, hey, is it really beautiful? Can it be beautiful, right? Should we let it be beautiful, right? Should we be disturbed that it's beautiful? Notice that Bernini is not taking inspiration from the predator-prey simile, right? You know, when Daphne was looking at the situation, she viewed it as a predator-prey thing, right? This definitely seems to be more in line of Apollo looking at the fleeing Daphne and thinking she's lovely. Now we look at both of them and potentially are invited to think that they're lovely. So I would keep it lingering in our heads. What should we think about using female distress as an occasion for the exercise of male artistry, right? Is that another way of using a woman, right? It's like, oh, this distressed female, let me make it beautiful and show what a virtuoso I am. So to me, Bernini's sculpture doesn't use myth as much to interrogate and critique social structures. He might be actually playing into them a little bit. But what I'd really like us to do is consider how some other post-antique authors and artists have used this story. And I'm going to project poems up here. They're short poems, but I also have a handout with them. So I just want to make sure I have this. And if we could make sure people in the back especially get them, yeah, cool. Because the people up here, you'll be able to see pretty clear. And you can share. There should be enough, but we'll see. As these are going around, do people have any questions or comments? Bring to mind. Yeah, Bella.
So do we know if these different, like, her fully transformed into a tree, or if it's like big transformation?
And I think that's one of the things that people especially love when they see this. It does seem to be this frozen moment, because if you look carefully at the details, bark is starting to come up her body, her feet are starting to grow into roots, leaves are starting to come out of her fingers. So he's taken this one moment where she's neither tree nor nymph, and he's frozen it for us. Yeah.
Like the statue or marble, it feels like it's almost being
manifestations of this moment of distress slash transformation that is supposed to be an escape. It's made very pretty, very romantic and beautiful. And of course, authors and artists have permission to do that. MIP is available for that, right? So in a way, it's not like Bernini's not allowed to do it. I just wonder about what it means to do that. What does it mean to take a story about attempted gender-based violence and make it romantic or make it beautiful? But there is a long tradition of taking a story and making it romantic or beautiful. Okay. All right. So let's look at our first poem. We will start with the shortest one by Edna St. Vincent Millay, written in 1922. Why do you follow me? Any moment I could be nothing but a laurel tree. Any moment of the chase I could lead you in my place a pink bough for your embrace. Yet if over hill and hollow, still it is your will to follow. I am off to heal, Apollo. So impressions of this poem. For instance, what role does the rhyme have? What tone is Daphne taking? What does it mean to tell it in Daphne's voice? I don't have things that I need you all to say. I just wanted to offer these and see how you unpack them. Yeah.
It sounds a bit playful, almost like teasing. She doesn't seem upset. All of the questions are not posed, but Brimey makes the questions less urgent, and some of the verbs and adjectives that they use, like a pink bough for your embrace, yet if over the hill and hollow, still if you will follow, I am off to heal, Apollo. It almost seems as though she's being tricked, like a trickster, in her turning into a tree to get rid of him.
Yes, there's this playfulness, there's this teasing aspect to it. How does it change the gender dynamics for me? What is Edna St. Vincent Millay even doing here? Yeah.
Situation.
Yes, on the one hand, this poem might seem like it's kind of a frivolous poem, right? Because it is kind of breezy in its tone. But if we think about things we've said earlier about Ovid's Daphne not having choices, now she has almost all the choice, right, in this poem. So even though it seems really playful, it's doing something kind of serious to the tradition. It's saying Daphne's in charge of this game. If you think of Apollo and Cupid in their contest almost being a sort of game, right? Which of us is the better archer? Now Daphne's in charge of all the games, right? And it's like, I'm chasing, you follow me. Yeah.
Okay, so to me, it actually sounded like really casual, but at the same time, like it was as if she was actually like being like serious, to be honest, like telling him off. It was just in a more casual language. Like the way that she's like, I am off to heal Apollo with the exclamation mark. Yeah, I don't know. That's just, yeah, that's what my take on it.
Yeah. Yes. She is teasing him, but she's definitely in charge. She's authoritative. What do we say to heal to? We say that to dolls,
Yeah.
right? So if think about Ovid's image, right? Ovid had this image where Apollo was a dog chasing a rabbit, but now Daphne's not a rabbit. She's in command of the dog, right? She's like, follow me, dog, if you want to run. So I do think there's this firmness in her stance now. She might be breezy about it, she might be teasing about it, but underlying it, it's like she knows.
Follow seems twice, but preying on someone is not exactly follow. It's not follow, just follow.
It's now just as if it's a game, right? not in fact some dire thing, right? Pursuing someone and following someone and hunting someone are really different things. He's de-escalating.
I think it's interesting, the step of power is the point code used the code, and it's less like they're thinking that's how the story should be interpreted, or how they wish, like dimensions of the story. If things had been different, that would have had the more power, it would have been less of an issue. And I think that like a place of like just quick instead of like education. Maybe follow that kind of path.
And myth is great this way. It gives authors and artists the chance to willfully revise. It's like every version of a myth is its alternate history, right? It could have gone this way, or it could have gone this way, it could have gone this way, right? And so here it's like, how could this have gone differently? Yeah. All right, let's look at another one. This one is going to be on two different slides, and it's this longer one by Melissa Ginsberg. And so I'm going to read it, but then we'll pause so you have like some time to process it. It's just more words here. And notice this is a very recent form. Halted in stride, unnipped as May flies, laureled and wreathed, newly rooted, yet even as a girl, she had that methylated breath, loved bay, loved riverbank, played house for hawks, had that crown in her, that stillness. When asked, does she miss the chase? At each petiole, rolls a glossy nib, a bit of shade, a blade, to lean against the flesh. To leaf the grove is no arrest. This boy is doing different work. Explaining Daphne. So, yeah.
She's totally viewed as an object in this poem.
On the other hand, the poet is outside looking in as opposed to inhabiting the eye, right? And this like Vincent Millay was like in Daphne's voice. Here the poet is outside looking at this tree. So she is a thing. Ella?
It kind of feels like instead of being trapped or transformed, she's almost returned to her true form. Almost like she was always destined to become this, like not just a symbol of something that her childhood, always free spirited, young girl, and there was no other option. This was what she was destined to.
It's no longer an escape or a punishment. I mean, and again, even when it was an escape, it was like overhinged with punishment, right? As if, re-trapping her. It's no longer that. It's actually, this baby was who she was. And what came before was problematic. That she's actually happy to be outside of those expectations. That something about her being a tree is actually oh yes. you're saying, for me, what I like about this poem, and what I find in it, is a real escape from compulsory heterosexuality, right? In that she wasn't up for it when she was a kid. She didn't want to play house with babies, right? With pretend babies. She wanted to play house, right? Play house for hawks, right? She wasn't up for that role of I'm going to give my dad children, grandchildren, and a son-in-law. She was doing something totally different. She liked the riverbank. And so she's glad. It's like here, she's like, to leave the grove is no arrest, right? It's not a punishment. It is better than having to do compulsory heterosexuality. This is one of two ace-friendly or ace-adjacent depictions of Daphne that I could find, right? Where I really do think that you can read this as sort of Daphne is asexual, right? She's playing that as part of her identity. Right? I don't want this, and this is what I want instead. There's also a short story in which it's very explicitly framed as the story of Daphne being used to affirm asexual choices. A whole bunch of children all decide to become trees because they do not want the expectations of sexuality. What are the particular moments that you especially like in this? Replaying for to get back
My six, right, not six, as like a sign of your power, your ability, your strength, and it was always mine. It's, and I've always had it, and it's always been mine.
She is returning to something and reclaiming something that was hers from the get-go. Yes, right? Had that pound in her, that stillness, right? As if she is able to return to the power or the identity that she had when she was younger, before all those social expectations came on her. All right, let's look at the next one. And I'm sorry, I forgot to advance the slide there. So that second half, I'm so sorry. All right, I'm going to read this next one. I have to tell you, it sometimes makes me cry. Honestly, it does. So if I get weepy, it's just because I am in the poem. All right, so this is also a relatively recent poem, Daphne Pursued by Apollo. A story told this many times becomes the forest. No beginning, no end, no longer a narrative, but the air we breathe. For centuries, a woman with a name rises from her sleep, becomes a tree, rains back down again into her rest. One myth for how poetry began. A man reaching, violence, myth. Apollo finds the tree inside of a woman. Apollo translates fingers into leaves, hears a voice and calls it wind. I am not interested in Apollo. I am interested in the Father God who could not stop the rake, but could turn his daughter into a tree. What kind of power is that? And how does it still river through our world? Why does nobody ask me that? I carry more keys than I need. Walking home from the library late, I thread silver teeth through my fist. I am not a tree, and I am asking. Sophia Stid highlight for us here? What is she using this poem to meditate on, right? You can think of these as opportunities for meditating.
I mean, like, this is like the teaching of poetry itself. I thought that and the structure of it is definitely more like a narrative than like a traditional like poetic structure. But right, certainly like turning it on its head and critique the art form as a whole.
Yes, yes. She is presenting it as a poem, but it's not dressed up as a poem, right? And she's critiquing something about the aesthetic impulse, right? That Apollo was taking that female and making it into poetry and finding the female Daphne so beautiful.
I really like the line where it says, "The god who could not stop the rape, but could turn his daughter into a tree," because I think it really talks, at least the way that I it's kind of, it kind of relates to the same thing of like telling women that they should wear clothing so they don't get to actually teaching things that can stop the rape or assault. I think that it kind of it puts the blame on the man instead of on the woman.
The father's role gets highlighted, that he had some sort of responsibility here, right? And he did play a role, but we still might want to critique it. And a lot of renditions of Apollo and Daphne, this story, don't meditate on the father. And I think you're right that Sophia Stid sort of putting the father in there now makes it not just a sort of one male, one female issue, right? It's like this is a social issue. Yes.
Like she puts it in her own perspective, like this modern woman, she's putting this story onto herself and all of it.
Right, right. So that it stays potentially a structure that we still inhabit whether we like it or not, right? That maybe some of us are stuck in this structure and can feel the pressures of this structure and of these gender dynamics working on us.
I really love the line about how I'm interested in the Father God who could not stop the rape, who could turn his daughter into a tree. Specifically, the question of like, what kind of power is that? Like, it almost makes the rape seem inevitable, and her being turned into a tree is almost like, what kind of power does a father have if we can't just fully stop it? Like, how do we stop it at all? If even our fathers, the Father God, couldn't, he just kind of put a pin in it of like, once she's not a tree anymore, it will inevitably just happen.
He has power. He couldn't stop the whole thing. The best he could do was take away the agency of his daughter, right? Like that was the best workaround here. Yes. And notice this idea that is going to just keep happening. I feel like Sophia Stid gestures to that at the beginning, right? What's the accumulation of this story getting told and told and told? And the best society can do is take away female agency, right? Is that it becomes the forest. That's what we have. We have all Daphnes turned into trees because that's what we can do. And then women come, they get transformed into trees, they disappear, but new trees come back. Like, are we stuck in this forest, right? This forest where the best possible outcome that could be achieved was immobilize the female.
I have a question. So Apollo's doing like this sort of approach. So like I thought it was interesting that there's this line where it goes like Apollo translates fingers into leaves, hears a voice and calls it balloon. It almost sounds like they're trying to give Daphne the credit for like creating poetry, and like while Apollo's like worshipped as this god of poetry, he gets his poetry from the voices in the wind, her voice. It's almost how like it's like that's what the story was meant to be more about, with her and her, like what happened to her and like the message that it creates, versus now Apollo's like, oh, I'm the god of poetry, I'm really cool. It's like this really that made it sound strong, that made it sound poetic.
And notice the way he does it, what his poetry aims at erases her as a person, right? He takes away her fingers and like, oh, they're like leaves. Oh, it's her voice, but now it's wind, right? So she becomes the sort of source in this poem. She becomes the embraces that, and it becomes part of his identity. So it's just another way of using the female. Yeah.
I thought it was interesting to find a whole bunch because like symbols of power like different ways. We found it like by not just trying to actually overpower kind of this like take advantage of the situation and her inability to something that he was glorified for something that he had that he took. And it was just
It is, and in a way, that line plays on so much of the artistic history of this myth, because when people romanticize this myth, one thing they often do is it's like as if Daphne becoming a tree was like, yeah, Apollo brought this beautiful thing out in her, right? But in fact, did he? No. He forced her to want to be transformed. She got transformed into a tree. And now we're making it this thing of beauty that he somehow brought out and that he somehow discovered, as if that was an innocuous thing. I don't know if I'm speaking to your exact point, but
yeah, it was like that also like I didn't the like, stronger yeah, I just thought it was like that he got this from her also.
he is using her for poetic purposes, symbolic sexual assault, right? Poeticized, aestheticized sexual assault. I think Sophia Stid is inviting us to consider that possibility very seriously.
I wanted to talk about the last line. I thought that was a really good point out. Daphne has been silent for years. And so it's talking it's kind of pointing out how many men don't take into account women when discussing women's issues, like because they just think of them frozen in their minds, whatever, and they just continue discussing women's issues. But she is saying, I'm standing in front of you and I'm telling you my issues, I'm telling you, I'm asking you, I'm questioning you, and not look at me, just that frozen image.
It's saying you have to notice the personness of the speaker, right? That the claiming of the I there, right? I am asking, I am directed out, and you can't ignore me because I am an agent rather than just an object.
Like the act of running keys and like branches coming out of them. You are already preparing to become else in accordance to protect yourself from a threat.
Yes.
That like it hurts to read it, to think about it, that like we have been taught, people might be, have been taught to protect ourselves against threats that are not there. That we have to be ever vigilant of like men who are walking around always, and it is our job to protect ourselves against them and not their job to not harm us.
Right, right. So she has to become something she might not even want to be, but she's forced by circumstances. Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right that image that Sophia Stid draws out totally plays on like the Bernini sculpture, where there's this focus on the fingers becoming branches. In the previous poem by Melissa Ginsberg, right? If the leaves become blades, at least they become sort of weapons, right? This idea that maybe it's not just so pretty that fingers become branches, that fingers become leaves. Maybe it's, in this case, something that has to happen for self-defense purposes, but that makes somebody something that they don't want to be, right? So friends, I didn't want us to have this as our last poem. So I have one more poem and then I have images, and we can talk about the images as well until the time is done. But thank you for sharing your thoughts about this one. This last one, just put it last because it is like waking, right? It is like, okay, waking. Morning light over the sill. She extends one wooden arm, pushes her hair back, bends her neck. From her breasts, the scent of babies. Finally, it is happening. She lifts the hem of her gown, steps out of their bed, over the carpet, down the stairs, and lifts the latch. Outside, in stronger light, she examines her hands, regards her bare feet, green everywhere. Your imagination, he'd say. No, in every step, she breaks into a run, holding her hands before her, flexing the fingers, opening, closing, opening. Anything jump out? Her transformation at the end is a kind of like she gets out of the house, right? It is freedom. Does she become a tree then, or was she a tree earlier? Or is it just two different ways of looking at a tree? Are there ways we can see her at the outset as like a tree? I think Margaret Kaufman sets up the opening, so it's like she starts the poem as a tree almost. Right? She extends one word. Yeah. In this relationship, right? She's in this relationship with this man, right? He'd say, it's a he. It's like she was a tree then, a tree that couldn't move, a tree that was stuck in the house, her wooden arm, right? And now she's reawakening, right? So what if there's an actor for Daphne? That she's doesn't have just these two options, right? Female desired by a man, or a tree appropriated by men but with no agency. What if there's this third option? And I think that's maybe the poem's gesture in that, this epilogue, this idea that there is something else.
In my interpretation, I thought of it, especially focusing on the line of your imagination, could say, is that she almost used being a tree as escapism. Like she eventually did get caught by Apollo, and she's like, no, I'm a tree. I'm just a tree. And she almost disassociated from the situation. And then finally she's free. And she's like, no, I was a tree, but now I'm a person. But he'd say, no, it's your imagination. You're not actually.
Yes, this weird thing your imagination, right? In a way, that's its own little mental trap. It's evidence that she had been somehow mentally trapped by him. I think that this poem was written before we used the term gaslighting, but it's almost like there's this gaslighting moment, right? Like, oh, he would gaslight me about this. She is seeing this transformation happening, and he somehow would tell her, no, it's not really happening. You're crazy, right? As if to get her back, so she wouldn't trust this seemingly positive transformation. Yes.
In her past, like, this is like with the opening and closing. Like this she's kind of regained this, and I just think it is kind of what the situation was. Just mental like she has like she was in a situation where she was not like in control she wants to be. Now she's just waking up on a new day and it's like the morning light is coming in. It's comfortable that she's able to.
Yes, exactly, right? It's called waking up. It's after some, it's after. And this image, right? It's like she gets to choose, right? This is me. This is me making the choice, opening and closing. It's not me having to grip the keys. It is not my fingers becoming branches. It's me, right? And it is. It's like she's like exercising self. If we realize every time we do this, we're choosing to be open or closed, right? It's not the world telling her, be open now, be closed now, right? She gets to decide whether she's open or closed. I think that's a powerful image. Oh yeah, I'm so sorry.
It's okay. I think about it as like, you know, her first realizing that she has to put roots in order to like be free or to like have autonomy. And so like inside of the house, she can't like root herself as a tree. Like she can't, you know, like grow from within a household, you know. She has to like plant herself outside. And like even though like I kind of grapple with the idea of like freedom being you being stuck in one place. Like for me, that feels like if I was to be stuck in one place, that wouldn't feel like freedom to me. But in this situation, you know, that's her only escape. It's like
Just get out of that house. How do you put roots in when you're in a house? You
Yeah.
can't. You can't. What I love about this poem is you know the imagery at the end. She like becomes a tree-ish. But she becomes a mobile tree because she's also running. And I love that, right? It's again not either or, it's both and, right? She is an agent and she is a tree. And you see, she's green. It's green everywhere. She is a different kind of tree. She's not the tree that's stuck. She's the tree that is flourishing, and she's not necessarily completely stuck in one place or rooted the way in the Melissa Ginsburg poem she was rooted and liked it, right? In that poem, she liked it. Whereas notice this Daphne-esque person is breaking into a run. She is running, right? She's enjoying the agency of running, and yet she's still somehow a tree. In that she's flourishing, that she's alive, she's not stuck in the house anymore. Yeah, I find that combination very powerful, this idea that there is another option. Also, I just like to point out the no in every step. I think it's important for us to meditate on the power of the affirmational no. Sometimes we focus on no as closing doors to people, right? We're closing ourselves off. But what if no is sometimes taking a stance for self, right? Especially if you've been hemmed in by whole bunches of expectations. That there could be a no that is actually very affirmational, right? So I just want to get that in there. I want to make sure we have time to look at one piece of art in particular. We have many, but I know I wanted to just get to one for sure. I wanted us to remember this Bernini because it's used or sort of echoed in this piece by Kate McDowell, right? So Bernini, McDowell. And here, this invites many interpretations. McDowell, the artist, sees it as an environmentally resident piece. That she's commenting on the environment. You could read it as a gender piece, commenting on gender. You could read it as a comment on art history. So I think it can be, and it could be doing many other things as well. I feel like about these other poems, if somebody said, Rebecca, you have to sit down and write a paper about those 4 poems right now, I feel like I could write a paper. If somebody said, Rebecca, you have to sit down and write an essay on this McDowell piece, I'm not sure I could right now, because I'm still grappling with it, right? And trying to figure out what I think it is doing. And it might be doing more than one thing. So I just wanted you all to see it. And now that you've thought about Daphne, you've seen some poems, you've seen the Bernini, what do you make of this sculpture? It really clearly is quoting the Daphne myth and quoting the Bernini sculpture, but the artist has crafted it. She's crafted fragments, right? She's crafted it as if it's been smashed. Yeah, Mina?
Well, it does feel like when I first saw it, it kind of made me think of like the word ravenous, of how people like pulling at something and actively breaking a sculpture, which would, in the case of the Bernini sculpture, be a portrait of female harassment or sexual harassment, sexuality, and her gender all being harassed in one kind of piece. And that kind of her becoming a tree, but specifically you don't see Apollo, you just see her being broken. And it feels as though like people have taken parts of her and that's all that is left behind, just the remains.
Yeah, so like besides the environmental meaning, I initially thought that it was more broke out of the tree kind of imagery. And then I noticed her facial expression, and I felt more that it was about like that, like we talked about the simple self, like the last poem. She now has like she has found all the pieces of self, but has to find a way to put them back together. And this time it's in physical form of like sculpture instead of like a medical kind of grasp.
It's challenge to the whole self, right? And what are the possibilities for reconstituting a whole self?
Oh, I was gonna say something else.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say that it seemed like everything just like broke her soul, like broke her down because of how unfortunate like everything is. Like, cause it's like all broken, and then her facial expression shows worry and fear. So that's what I thought.
Yes, like why should we expect Daphne to be resilient, right? Like she has suffered the slings and arrows here, right? So why should we expect her to be resilient, right? She has been hammered, right, by circumstances.
I just thought it was interesting that she almost took out all of the parts of Daphne's body that would be like considered sexual way. Like the convention, you know, like the breast or I just thought that was an interesting kind of almost objectified part of the leg and stuff. So it's almost, I mean, I don't see this.
Yes, I like where you're going. Notice it could be very freeing. It also could be, this is what's left because what was wanted was those other things, right? So we sort of claim and use those other things. And actually her head, who needs her head, right? That I'm being sarcastic. I'm going to write, we need her head, right? And I know we have to end in a minute, so maybe have one more, and then I'm just going to quickly show you images. We're not going to talk about them.
I was literally gonna say the exact same thing of like, I interpreted it as like, in a sense, Apollo reached her and just took what he wanted. He didn't need her mouth to say anything to him. He didn't need her hands to try and like hit at him and take him away. He didn't need her legs for her to run away from him. He just needed her body, and that was just an immobile body. That's all he needed from her.
Yes, and I think when McDowell thinks about her piece as having an environmental message, it's about using what you want and just trashing the rest. So here are just quickly some other images. This watercolor by L.C. Driggs from 1935. Apollo is just there as a sketch in the background. He's just part of a line drawing. This by Richard Prince, kind of sampling Picasso and Bernini and other things. That's a past we didn't have a chance for it. Medieval illustration, I just find freakish, but interesting. And then some pretty traditional, this is sort of very traditional representations of Daphne. And there's Apollo triumphing, and Daphne's just there, barely in the background, but his whole garment is like a laurel colored fabric, and he's wearing the crown. Friends, I ran a little bit over, I'm sorry, James. But thank you all for your thoughts and for sharing your afternoon with me.
And next week, we don't have a discussion, but the week after, on November 30th, we'll have President Ellis Arnold talking to us. He's going to be retiring, and so he's going to be discussing his time at Hendrix and what Hendrix meant. Weeks. Thanks everybody for coming.
Dr. Dow,
Yeah.
who was the president here that lived here? Like, I don't know.
It's been,
What was that for a second?
yeah, because I've been here for a good number of years, and as long as I've been here, the president was here, so I think it's maybe the possible president. It's
Hatcher?
maybe,
Oh,
maybe, but it might be earlier than that.
So in the two things that I was thinking
Yeah.
about, in the like